All right, let's move on to Hillary Clinton. This is something I've been wanting to put in the show for quite some time. I actually watched this interview live. I was sitting in the state of Pennsylvania. You know, it was in the morning. You know, my father-in-law loves to keep CNN on. Don't ask me why, but I was forced to endure this struggle session. And it's funny because it's one of those things where Smirkonish clearly does not realize the magnitude of what actually just was said. But if you're listening carefully, you're like, that's one of the most insane things I've ever heard. So here we have Hillary talking about how imperative it is to censor and to monitor content. Let's take a listen.
There should be a lot of things done. We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control.
We lose total control. All right. So what do we take away from that, Ryan? We lose total control.
No, who's the we and what are you controlling?
Who's the we? What are you controlling? What are we talking? You know, it's interesting too. We should consider like what the context of this interview actually happens, because it happened within the general context of being asked not necessarily about social media, but about election strife ahead of this election. So that was specifically being talked about in the context of quote unquote misinformation ahead of the current election. And I was thinking, wow, that's very revealing, isn't it? It also gets to the bitterness of Hillary, because you have to remember that the through line for all of this is still Russia 2016. Mm-hmm. And now they've faux intellectualized the argument about all this. And look, you know, the whole Section 230 thing, there's arguments to be made, actually. I've seen from the right, from the left about it, about liability and all that. But if you're making the argument explicitly to say that we need straight up much more criminal liability for platforms for spreading misinformation, that gives the game away in a very certain sense.
Yeah, and it also suggests that she still believes that most of big tech, obviously she feels like Twitter has fallen, but she still feels like most of big tech is susceptible to her pressure.
Yeah.
That there's some alignment there, that they're not doing enough according to her, but she feels like if she makes the case, if Democrats put enough pressure on them, they can. 230 is interesting for people to know. That's the section of the law that says that if you're a platform, basically, let's say you're a comment section, that you are not personally liable. Your company is not liable for something that somebody says in a comment section, because the argument is that you can't have a free-flowing debate of user-generated content if you have to fact-check every single thing that every Tom, Dick, and Harry is putting up on your site. The argument against it is that that was the case when platforms were neutral, and that everybody had an equal chance, and that the published product of that platform was the sum of the parts of the voices that were allowed to flow freely into it. So the argument is, if you're no longer balanced and your algorithm is pushing something far to the left or pushing something far to the right or driving a particular narrative, then you are actually a publisher, and you no longer should have the shield of 230. Let's say, to take Twitter for example, if they can prove that like Musk like goes in and puts his thumb on the scale, or old Twitter, if with old Twitter you could prove that they were going in and putting their thumb on the scale and pushing it in Biden's direction on the Hunter Biden story or whatever else, then you would say, well, actually, that's not protected. And you now can be sued for defamation.
I just think the context of this, well, actually, you know what? We never got to talk, because that also came after that Tim Walz clip from the debate. We haven't spent enough time. We all had to move on. But okay, as a leftist, give us the take on why Tim Walz was wrong.
Shocking from Tim Walz. Well, first of all, he did the stupid,
can't yell fire
in a crowded theater.
Which is fake. Yeah, it's actually incorrect.
If there's a fire, you absolutely can.
Right.
And if you yell fire in a crowded theater and you do not cause panic, then that also is fine. Like, you're allowed to do that.
Right. This is a commonly cited thing. I don't know what the origins of it even are.
It was in a Supreme Court. It was in a Supreme Court ruling where he was saying, like, obviously you can't yell fire in a crowded theater and cause falsely,
that's right.
falsely.
That's right. And
you can't falsely yell fire in a crowded theater and to cause panic. So you need all of those different elements. You have to know it's false and you have to cause panic. And they were using it to lock up socialists who were calling for resistance to the draft.
That's right.
World War I. But they weren't even calling for resistance to the draft. They were telling people to call their member of Congress and argue to repeal the draft law. So, and they locked the head of the Socialist Party up for like 6 months for that or whatever. So terrible for anybody to point to that in any way. More worrisome, I thought, was what he said right after that. He said, you don't have a right to hate speech.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, actually you do.
It's like, bro, that's the whole point.
Right.
Like
and
free speech that is just loving speech makes no sense. Who's going to prosecute for loving speech?
Well, it's especially terrifying in the context of all these like democratic current efforts to like institutionalize, the definition of anti-Semitism. What is it, the IHRA definition, which basically is just, it's anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, which is nuts. I mean, and by the way, that fits with a lot of those Republican BDS laws that are already on the books, totally unconstitutional if you.
And outsourcing the definition of something like that to a private organization, which could then go on its website and change it again.
Yeah, the whole thing is crazy. But anyway, I mean, it's alive and well in the censorship industrial complex.
Wasn't it Colombia that said you can't use Zionist in a pejorative way?
That just happened. Yeah, didn't you talked about that? Because, well, Colombia's, it's different. It's private. We can criticize it, but there's not much you can do on an institutional level.
You could say you don't get federal funding.
Yeah, but you made a good point. You were like, wait, but what about in like history classes? Like, what do you
in papers?
say? It's like in papers, you know, in a literal academic context. But suddenly a lot of those concerns just disappear. And because what we all know is that they really mean it, that if it's in a historical context, it's fine. But if it's in a political context on campus and you don't like it, and especially if the donors don't like it, that's when you're going to get expelled. And that's when it's a problem. Okay, we've got Jefferson Morley standing by, so let's get to it. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.